All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Natural Health Practices. My name is Megan. I know I've met many of you before, but in case you've never met me, if you're watching online or if you're joining us here at the office tonight, I'm an associate nutrition practitioner here as well as the PEMF practitioner, which you can find more information about on our website or on our Facebook page if you have any questions about that. I'm really excited because tonight's workshop is about salt. And my husband says that this should be my all-time favorite workshop to teach because he calls me a saltaholic. I'm actually not allowed to salt anything in our home because he's convinced I oversalt it. I don't think there's such a thing as oversalting food, so I've been banned from that job. So we each, do our own thing with salt. But I really, really love salt. And that's because years ago I had a mentor who taught me a lot of the things that I'm going to try to share with you tonight. So I'm just really excited about this one. I know that for most of us here, we use salt to amplify the taste of food, right? We put it on our meats or our vegetables, maybe grains if we eat those, and even like desserts utilize salt to make sure that the flavor is balanced and that it tastes really good, like in our mouths, that our taste buds are really happy. And my thing I always come back to, which of course if you ever sat with me back in PEMF, you know that I like to really overthink things. But why do we like salt? Like what is it about salt that, that we're drawn to? Why do we want to put it on things? Why does it make food taste better? And I had a patient a couple years ago who asked me, is salt the same as sugar? Does salt, do we become addicted to it? Does it mess with our brain chemistry and all that stuff? And I can tell you from the chemistry of it that is not at all the case, okay? Because if you've ever been to this office and heard other talks of ours before, we really advocate for low sugar diets. So we're getting rid of white sugar and things like that. When it comes to salt, it's very different, okay? Salt is actually needed inside of the body. And for many of you, it might be brand new information to hear this, right? Because there's been a big push by our government over the past several decades to kind of demonize salt, saying we need to have less salt in our diet, saying to choose foods that, are processed but have low sodium and all these things. So we've really been kind of trained to look for things that have limited quantity of salt in them, all right? And I always kind of wondered, why is that? Why is it that everyone uses salt and likes salt, yet we kind of push for this lowering our consumption of salt? So I kind of want to do my quick little history lesson because, of course, that's what I love to do when I talk about these things. So there's kind of two parts to this story. So when it comes to the United States government, I will tell you that our regulations on salt are completely different than other countries, okay? So there are some things that the whole world kind of can agree on and limit, and they talk about regulations. The United States and Canada stand alone when it comes to salt consumption. This kind of began back in the late 70s, early 80s, when a few scientific studies came out and noticed that there was a correlation between lower salt intake and lower blood pressure, okay? So it noticed that people who consumed less salt had lower blood pressure. So of course the media went crazy and everyone was like, oh my gosh, it must be that salt, having too much salt causes higher blood pressure. So we hear that a lot, okay? Now, although I very, very much believe in scientific studies, I know that we need them. They're essential for the progression of science. I literally spend my spare time reading these things. There are a lot of things that are lacking in these early studies regarding salt, okay, when this kind of came out. So for example, how were the participants consuming salt? They don't let us know. So we don't know, are these people chowing down on potato chips? Are they drinking pickle juice? Are they just using table salt? We literally know none of the variables here, okay? So we don't even know that the people with lower blood pressure, were they consuming more vegetables? Were they exercising? Were they the only people in the studies who were non-smokers? Again, we just don't have access to any of that other information. So for me, even though correlation is maybe there, it's not causation. So to demonize salt in this particular type of study doesn't make sense, okay? So it's one of those things that we need just more information. So since then, the study's been replicated a zillion times. Literally, you can look up, there's been 300 replications. But the same problem occurs and the numbers continue to change. In some of the studies, 30 out of every 100 people have lower blood pressure when they consume lower salt. In some, it's 10 out of every 100. In some, it's 5 out of every 100. It never goes up more than 30 out of every 100. And again, the variables aren't there. We still don't know when they lower their salt consumption, what are they lowering? Are they just lowering how much table salt they're using, or are they getting rid of potato chips or getting rid of like processed junk food that had added salt to it? We don't know what that looks like. So that part's kind of missing for me. I just don't have that concrete evidence, as well as many other people, and that's why other countries around the world haven't gone after salt in this same way, right? The proof just isn't necessarily there. The second part of this story has to do with the FDA. So around this same time, the head of the FDA was a woman, and she was also on the board for the MSG Coalition. Does anyone know what MSG is? Have you ever heard of MSG? Okay, so people have heard of it. It's a food additive. It's often found in like Asian foods or some processed foods. It kind of gives food that really like savory, yummy taste, right? And what it is it's actually monosodium glutamate, which is basically like you isolate glutamic acid and stabilize it with salt. So it gives it like that flavor, right? So a scientist like discovered that he could isolate this and turn it into a product called MSG that you could add to foods to make it more savory, to make it really delicious. Now the problem is that MSG has to be made in a lab. It is not something that's naturally occurring. Can't go outside and find like a source of MSG. You can find products that have, foods, whole foods that have monosodium glutamate in them, but it's part of the whole food. It's not, you can't ever find it like isolated or by itself. The problem with MSG is that when you intake it, it actually forces the release of insulin. So even though there's no carbohydrates in it and there's no sugar in it, it messes with our blood sugar. So oftentimes we'll eat something, and let's say you eat a big meal and there's MSG in it, an hour later you're going to be hungry again because it's messing with those insulin levels. It's kind of putting you on a little bit of a roller coaster. So it's kind of tricky, right? And like no wonder the food industry loves it, because it means that you're going to keep coming back for more and more and more. It increases your appetite, okay? So it's just kind of like a weird little substance that they developed in a lab. So anyway, this lady who's voting on regulations for the FDA is also being paid by the MSG Coalition, who at that time is trying to advocate that MSG is a safer alternative to salt. Okay, so she's literally getting paid for this, and then she's trying to push regulation. So to me, that's a red flag. Okay, that just seems like a little concerning. All right, I will tell you that since then, this was in the early 80s, since then, friends of hers, colleagues of hers have come out and shared like tapes and videos, recordings, emails, letters of her like stating that there was no scientific claim against salt, but that she needed the publicity. Okay, so like that is like public information, and I can't tell you what happened behind closed doors. I don't know anything more about this woman or about that process, but I can tell you that she obviously had her feet, in both sections. So she was making decisions, I think, based off of her pocketbook, not based off of scientific facts. So that was kind of what started this big crusade for like low sodium and no more salt. And I'm sure she was hoping that more people were going to add MSG instead of salt for flavoring, hoping that it would also increase sales and things like that too. So that's just like two parts of that history that I just want you to take into consideration, because when you go on, like actually the FDA in 2012 even came out publicly and said that there really is minimal research in terms of the dangers of salt. So like they're continuing to make better decisions in how they, go about this, and we don't see it quite as big of a push recently as we did over the past couple decades, but it's definitely something I want you to just kind of keep in the back of your head when you see products that really push, like low sodium, like, okay, well, I wonder what's in there, then that will make it taste good. I do want to say, based off of what I just talked about, I want to make sure that we're really clear that I do not encourage eating bad quality salty foods. So eating junk food or eating potato chips or eating things that are processed that have a lot of salt. I'm not saying those things are good by any means. I just don't think that the attack on salt as a whole, or like encouraging people to lower their salt intake, I don't think that that's the right way to go about it. So if you've been at our office before, you know that we really push for whole food and nutrient-dense diets and making good choices. So that still applies here. I just want to clear the air about why I think the research isn't really there in terms of lowering our salt consumption. Additionally, humans have been using salt since the beginning of time, okay? Every single culture, every tribe, every community, every city uses salt. There's not a single place in the world, even like historically, not even a tribal community that does not have access or that does not use salt in their diet. That to me is really important, okay? Because next to water, it is the next in line for the most frequently consumed item across the world. So everyone drinks water and everyone uses salt, no matter where you are in the world. And I think that that's really important. So throughout history, we have people like Plato who referred to salt as the divine substance. Areas with low sodium in the soil or no access to salt deposits typically couldn't even support humans. Okay, so that means that certain tribes or certain people, like back in the day when they were looking for places to live, they would not even choose a place to live unless they had good salt in the soil or unless they had access to like a salt mine or salt deposit, okay? The importance and quest for salt is what created many of the trade routes across the world. In areas with large amounts of salt, it's where a lot of the ports and cities and thriving communities were built. The word salary, so like we're paid like a yearly salary, is actually the Latin word for salt because they used to be paid in salt. That's how important it was. That's how valued salt was, a long time ago. Having control over the salt supplies is literally how the Roman Empire was built because they recognized that they needed access to salt for food, for like preserving their food and making sure it could last longer so that they could feed bigger amounts of people. And they knew that salt at that time was basically money, right? It was very valuable. It's very important to not only health, but to the wealth of a community. Over time, there's actually been books written on this. There's been political patterns that have emerged throughout history that where salt was plentiful, the society tended to be free, independent, and democratic. Whereas salt was scarce, those who controlled the salt controlled the people. So it has had a huge impact, right, on our history and how we've developed, not just, as humans, but all of our culture and just how civilization has progressed. Really, you can trace it back a little bit to like how salt has been a part of that. So again, we come to the question of why is that? Why is it that salt has been so essential to everything that we've built up as a civilization? And it always comes back to the fact that we need salt. Our bodies need salt. The interior of our body is salty like the ocean, okay? Without salt, the chemical reactions that support things like enzyme function or energy production, hormone production, protein transport, and other biochemical processes can't work at their best, okay? Salt is needed for things like protein digestion. So if any of you were here when I did my acid reflux workshop, we talked about how essential it is to have the hydrochloric acid in our stomach. We can't have proper hydrochloric acid unless we have proper salt consumption because the hydrochloric comes from the sodium chloride that is salt. So without that consumption, that production tends to weaken. It also helps with the development of the brain, your adrenal function, your nerve conductivity, your muscular activity, and cellular metabolism. So if you've ever done PEMF therapy with me, you know that we use magnets back there in the bed. And sometimes if you get off the table, I always say make sure you drink water. And for every once in a while, I'll tell someone, maybe put a little bit of salt in your water. Or maybe someone will call and they'll say, I really love PEMF, but I had a little bit of twitching in my arm. So I'll tell them, put a little bit of salt in your water. That's because your body doesn't have enough salt. So the conductivity, so the energy that we're putting into the body kind of gets stuck. It doesn't have enough for like a good chemical reaction to occur as it's supposed to. So salt is really essential for all of those processes to happen as they should, okay? So the requirements of the human body demand that the salt concentration in the blood be kept constant. So we actually have mechanisms in place to make sure that the salt levels in our blood is always there, including like how we sweat and how we go to the restroom and all these things. Like the body is always taking into account how much salt we have in the body. we have to consume salt because our bodies cannot produce this nutrient on its own. So we don't have an organ or somewhere in the body that just produces this when we run low, okay? When we run low, the body has to do things differently. It has to stop certain functions from happening or slow them down so that way, basically, like, it can catch up, right? It can keep that balance within the blood. To have too little salt in our diets has been correlated with symptoms such as cognitive dysfunction, especially in older adults, impaired brain development in babies and children. I've literally read probably 12 to 15 studies where they've looked at babies who didn't have enough salt from their mother or from the foods they were eating in the first couple years of life, and they had serious brain development issues. Okay, the research is there if you ever want to look it up. It's sort of fascinating. There's also an increased risk of cardiovascular distress if you don't have enough salt. Again, if you think about the signaling and you think about the chemical reactions and how we need the muscles to be functioning and how, you know, they need to be strong for your heart. So if you don't have enough salt in the body, that can be impaired. There's also a correlation between older adults having unsteadiness, more falls, and more fractures due to like decreased salt in their diets. Fatigue is very common, muscle cramping, and dehydration. I told a story earlier today about a patient I was seeing for nutrition a couple of years ago. And she literally, we had her on supplements, we're doing all these things, and like her muscle cramping and some of her symptoms just were not getting better. So we literally started testing, like putting water with a little bit of salt in her mouth, and she would test totally different. She was so dehydrated, even though she was drinking water, she didn't have that proper mineral balance. Okay, so that can be a really big issue for people, and they don't realize that some of their symptoms are coming on because they're either dehydrated or lacking those proper minerals within the body. So now that we know that the importance of salt, let's talk about quality and quantity. Okay, so quality of salt is really important. So one issue that, you know, a lot of people come in, they say, oh, I use salt all the time. So then I'll say, okay, what kind of salt are you using? They say, oh, whatever was cheapest at Publix or at Walmart, I use table salt. So a problem with table salt is that most of it's been refined and then actually bleached. So back in like the 1940s, the prime of the Industrial Revolution, they decided that salt needed to look bright white and super uniform. Every grain should match every grain. They didn't want it looking wild or anything like that. So they started putting it through this industrial process where they actually refined it and broke it down, and then they would actually bleach it so that it was white, okay? So I'll show you in a second, but typically there are some salt mines where there is white salt, but typically around the world they aren't that pure white color. With this process, the problem is that you're taking out all the minerals from the table salt, okay? So it's going through machinery and being broken down and cooked down and bleached, so all those essential minerals are taken out, and some toxins are put in, right? We've got like bleach, sometimes there's chlorine in salt, and even trace amounts of cyanide have been traced to table salt, okay? So it's freaky stuff, right? Like, no wonder like people don't want to use it. It's because it's not fulfilling anything in our bodies anymore if we're just using that plain old table salt that you just get from the store. The cool thing about unrefined salt, so salt that has not gone through that process, is that it usually contains 80 to 100 essential minerals. That's amazing, right? Like we can get all the minerals we need pretty much if we're having high quality salt. Unrefined salt also doesn't have the toxic chemicals. If you have a really nice high quality, like some I'll show you, they even do testing for things like heavy metals and chemicals to make sure and to prove to you that there is nothing harmful within them. Generally, I recommend ingesting at least a teaspoon of unrefined salt per day. Other countries actually recommend 3 to 5 teaspoons throughout the day, and our FDA at this time recommends that you intake less than 1/4 of a teaspoon, okay? So it's kind of all across the board. I really recommend, I'm not saying I need you to like eat salt out of a spoon, but to be salting your food properly or be adding salt to like your reverse osmosis water, even if it's just a little bit, trying to make sure you're getting that high quality salt and the appropriate amount of minerals every day is really essential. Good brands of unrefined salt, which I included in the handout and we'll make sure to post online, My favorites are the Celtic salt, which I brought. So here you can see the label. So sometimes you'll see this. I think now even some of the big stores are starting to carry this. If you're down here in Port Orange, you can get it from Love's, Whole Foods, or Debbie's. You can also find it on Amazon or even the Celtic Sea Salt website, okay? So it's a great one. They've got the grinders, they've got smaller ones, but I kind of wanted to pass these around, which I know seems really weird. Facebook, I'm sorry, you probably can't tell, but this salt kind of has like a gray tint to it. The consistency of it is really kind of interesting. I just kind of wanted you guys to like see it so you can kind of get an idea of the difference between, like, if you're looking at a table salt, which is just that pure white, it just doesn't really have any kind of consistency to it. So there's that one. And then Redmond is another great brand. This is what the label looks like. And I've got like the fine, like the really fine sea salt here. And then this is like, you can actually put it in a grinder. So it's just a really beautiful color. So I wanted to pass that one around too, just so you can kind of see what it looks like when you're looking at different types of unrefined salts, as opposed to what a lot of people are used to in restaurants and on their own tables is just that really white salt, okay? So we can post these or links to these and make sure that you guys look at them, but those are my two favorite brands. I know that Himalayan Sea Salt is something that's become really popular. If you go to like even like TJ Maxx or Home Goods, there's literally like a whole aisle now of the Himalayan sea salts. So here's what I want to tell you about those. The Himalayan salts are great. They're much better than the table salts, okay? They're not processed, they're not refined or bleached in that way, but the Himalayan salts, I always recommend doing them in moderation or rotating them with like the Redmond or the Celtic salt. Here's the reason why. A lot of them have that really bright pink color. Redmond's does a really good job. They do testing. The pink color comes from iron, okay? So iron, when it oxidizes, has that little like red or orange tint to it. It's because there's iron in this that it has that color. Redmond's does a really great job. They basically mine from a salt mine and they test it, and their iron is pretty low considering the color of theirs. Other people that sell the Himalayan sea salt, they don't always test, and you can have issues where their iron is too high. So I always recommend, if you know that you have high iron, go more with the Celtic sea salt as opposed to the Himalayan. It takes a really, really long time. It's minuscule amounts, so it takes a long time for that to build up in the body, but it is something to just keep in mind, okay? So for me, I love it. I rotate them, okay? Like one day I'll use the Celtic, maybe the next day the Redmonds, or you know, however you want to do it, but just so you know straightforward like what that color is and what you need to look for when you're looking for a high quality brand. Okay, so the take-home message here is that salt is an essential nutrient for the human body, right? We can't live without it, and it doesn't make any sense on a biochemical level or on a common sense level to limit our intake, okay, or to be really focused on this crusade against salt. So the big question then too is, how do we know if we're getting adequate minerals and if your salt is working for you? There are several options for helping with this. So based on what you know, what we just talked about, making choices of high quality salts is really good. High quality nutrition, making sure you're having good foods. If you have the handout, I did put a little thing in there that talks about naturally occurring salts. So a lot of animal products do have a little bit of naturally occurring salts. That's really beneficial. I talked about the high quality salts in there. I also talked about products you can find. So like at Love's Whole Food, there's like a sauerkraut, and if you look at the label, I can show you this too, it says on the back, Celtic sea salt. So people are proud when they use it. You'll see it on certain labels. So there are other ways to incorporate it into your diet. You don't just have to like oversalt everything or put the salt in your water. There are foods that can help contribute to that as well, okay? And make sure, for those of you on Facebook who don't have my handout, when I talk about animal products, it is really important to have high quality animal products. We want high quality meats like grass-fed beef, pasture-raised eggs, the salty fermented foods, ideally organic when possible, and again, cooking with the high quality salts. The last thing that can also be really beneficial is taking whole food nutrient dense supplements. Like we carry the Standard Process and a couple other brands, and they are using whole foods, and some of them have the naturally occurring salts in them and can help with mineral balance. So some of you might not even know that you're on supplements that are helping our bodies with all of these functions and the proper conductivity. Now, everyone's different in what the best way to incorporate salt is, into your diet. So I don't want you running home and just like shoving salt in your mouth, okay? So just, take this with a grain of salt, right? Okay, so take this information as it applies to you. Maybe for you, using the Celtic salt on your food is great and that helps you and it makes you feel good and the flavor is great, awesome. Maybe for someone else, they need to come in and be checked, right? Because there are some things that can impede our absorption and utilization of salt. So I've had people come in where we know they're drinking enough water, we know that they're using a high quality salt, and yet they still have issues where they feel dehydrated or fatigued and little things like that. And sometimes it can be that our bodies just aren't absorbing or utilizing the minerals. Maybe that's because they have like a heavy metal toxicity or some kind of burden on the body where they're not utilizing things as the body was meant to. So that's where the nutrition response testing comes in, which, as most of you know, that's how we practice nutrition in this office, okay? And it's a system we use to zero in on the underlying cause of illness or unwanted symptoms, and with this system, we can determine what the body needs nutritionally. So that also means that we can check literally your salt, but it really means that we can hone in on what kind of burdens are going on in the body or what kind of deficiencies are going on in the body. So maybe it is a mineral deficiency, and we can make sure that you're using the best products, eating the best you can to kind of help with that and to help your body heal as it should be. Sorry, I lost my spot, guys. Okay, so maybe if you do nutrition response testing program, this might be in conjunction with a certain nutrition, program or protocol. A lot of times, we go over like food logs with you and help you make those nutrient-dense choices. But really what we're trying to do is provide you with nutrients to regain the vitality of your organs, okay? It's amazing. I know all of you know bits and pieces of my story, but this is what has helped me with so many different issues, and I really, really believe in it more than I can explain. And our purpose really here collectively at this office is to help others regain their health through natural means. And truly, we all believe here that the quickest way to do that is through nutrition response testing. It's probably easier if I show you, so I'm going to have Kim come on up and be my little demo assistant here. I'll kind of show you what it looks like. If you've never seen it before, if you're tuning in on Facebook, you can kind of get a better visual for what's going on. All right. Okay, everybody, so this is Kim. She's another associate here at the office. And Kim's up here, and as you can see, she is alive and well, and she's a human, so that's good, right? It's a good start. So here she is standing, and basically anything that's alive has energy and has strength to it, okay? So Kim's standing here. We know that her body has energy, it's functioning, it's doing things just while she's standing right there, okay? Now, if Kim were to go up to Michigan, right now we have snow up there, I'm from that area, right? So if she were to go up there and to go ice fishing, and she accidentally falls in the water, and she becomes hypothermic, okay? What's going to happen to Kim's body is that the blood in her feet and her hands and her extremities is going to start going towards her vital organs. It's going to go towards her heart and her lungs and her brain. It's going to protect those areas. So her extremities become less important, and everything that's essential for her to survive becomes really, really important, right? Does everyone understand that concept? Okay, good. So this concept can also be applied to why we use nutrition response testing. So Kim standing here right now isn't under any stress. She can stand here, she's fine, she's not hypothermic right now, which is really good. Now if I have her hold out her arm, so if she puts this arm out, and I put a little bit of pressure there and ask her to match me, she can do that no problem, okay? So I'm just putting a little bit of pressure on, she can match it, nothing's going on, right? She's not falling over, her arm can hold that, it's not a problem because there's no stress kind of going on right now. Now let's say that she puts her arm out again and I have her match my pressure, and at the same time I stomp on Kim's foot and I really hurt her foot. What's going to happen? I'm going to push and her arm is going to fall down. And the reason that happens is because I've put stress on her body somewhere else, and her body is smart and knows, just like in the same scenario with the hypothermia, it knows, oh, holding up my arm is not important. I have to go and check out this stressor, this other thing that's happening. Okay, so we use this same concept to check the organs of the body and to check to see what's going on, to see if an organ is under stress, to see what's happening in a patient's body, okay? So let's say, for example, that Kim isn't getting enough good salt. So she's mineral deficient and it's affecting her thinking, okay? She's having a hard time. So let's say she comes in as a patient and we want to check her. We'd have her lift her arm, and we'd have her match pressure, and we would touch different organs of the body. And let's say I got to her head, okay? I'm touching her brain, and it's under stress because it doesn't have enough nutrients. And I go to match the pressure of her arm's gonna go down because her body is telling me there is stress here, and if I'm touching it, the body basically says, oh no, we need to make sure that we protect that stressed out essential organ instead of holding up the arm. So it gives us a good indication that that's where stress is occurring. Okay, so that's when we would then use our 5 stressor kits. So if you've ever been to our office before, you've seen these. They're pretty cool. We've got some vials in here that represent different things, including food sensitivities, immune challenges, heavy metals, chemicals, and even scars on the body. So we utilize these to then determine why is her brain having stress, okay? So maybe for Kim, she's using good salt, but like I said before, maybe there's a burden on the body. So let's say for her, heavy metals shows up, okay? So we figure out that heavy metals is stressing out her brain. Then what do we do next? What we do next is we would actually grab supplements, whole food supplements, that would help with gently detoxing those heavy metals from the body and from the brain. And we'd also be looking maybe for a mineral support or something to support the brain, okay? So we'd pull different supplements one at a time and check them against Kim's body to see what makes her arm strong when we go back to that stressed area. Oh, thank you. So for example, let's say we've pulled some supplements, we're trying to figure it out. Should we have her hold that? We'd go back to the stress spot, and when I push down this time, her arm is really strong. So that's an indicator to us that the body no longer feels frantic, like that area is under stress, when it has this support near the body, okay? So it's a pretty cool concept. We can literally do this with any organ, and the really neat thing is that the body actually tells us like what layer of things it wants to deal with first. It can prioritize, and it wants to do things very gently, which is another great thing about nutrition response testing, is we go as fast as your body wants us to go. So it's just amazing. I love it. I know everyone here pretty much has utilized it in some form and has had great success with it. So Kim, thank you very much. All right, so when we use this designed clinical nutrition to address specific issues for everyone, we can help you understand what your body is most in need of, okay? And everyone is so different. We have kind of a motto with nutrition response testing, and that is anything can cause anything. So that means, like, even if all of you come in and you tell me you have headaches, you're not all gonna have the same reason for having headaches, okay? Maybe for someone they've got, heavy metals. Maybe for someone else they're just deficient in magnesium. It can be so different based on each person. So that's why it's so great if you can come in and we can actually test you and see what's going on and see what your body reveals to us. All right, it's really pretty cool that we can use nutrition response testing to narrow in on the issues. And I know that if it's the first time you're ever seeing this, or if you're watching online, that it can look really unusual. But I can assure you that we have had success not only here at this office, but with nutrition response testing practitioners around the world have just been amazing. I mean, it's amazing, and I know a lot of you can attest to it. If this is something that you're interested in, feel free to stay after if you're here. We can talk a little bit more. You can do a free health screening, or we could even get you scheduled. If you're watching us online on Facebook, definitely call the office and try to get in on our schedules. We'd be happy to see you. Or if you're interested in like nutrition coaching, we also do that as well, where we look more at what you're eating and how we can get more nutrient dense foods into the body, and making sure you're using things like good quality fats and the right kind of salt and all those essential little things that sometimes people overlook. All right, so we want to create a community and a world of people who are empowered to take back their health and feel their best. And I think that's the most important thing when you come into our office. Yes, we are here to help you. We're trained in different modalities to make sure that your body is healthy, but really your body is the one that's doing all the work. We're testing you and we're providing you with nutrients, or maybe Dr. Shelley's providing you with an adjustment. But in the end, it's your body, okay? It's the innate intelligence inside your body that's actually doing the healing, and that's what we want. It's a natural way to get results. It's an easy way to get results. We can test anyone from babies to the elderly, and it's a pretty simple technique, okay? All right, does anyone have any questions for me today about salt or about anything? Yes?
When you mentioned the iron,
yes.
What if somebody's deficient in iron? Would that be a good thing for them then?
Absolutely. So
Okay.
if you do know that you have a deficiency in iron, people who are anemic, I even have, I've worked with some women, like when they have their menstrual cycle, they'll actually use that one that week of or something like that to help balance out the iron in the body. So it can actually be a beneficial tool. Again, it's very minuscule amounts, but I have had people who, have used it every single day for 10 years, and then they notice like, oh, my iron's a little bit high. It's never been anything, scary, but it is something just to keep in mind if you're someone who already knows that your iron is high, but absolutely it can be utilized for good things too. Yes?
The Celtic, I never say it right.
Yeah, that's okay. I had been told both ways.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, this one
yes, yeah.
is like wet-ish.
Yes, it's kind of weird consistency. So I know those of you on Facebook can't see it, but the Celtic sea salt does have almost like a consistency, like it seems like it's wet, and it literally comes from the sea, right? It has this consistency, and the way that it's mined, it's not actually wet. It's literally just the mineral composition of that particular salt. If you go on their website, they do an amazing job explaining that, and I'm sure I wouldn't do it justice, but it is like kind of a bizarre texture, which is why I brought it to kind of show all of you the difference between like something like that versus like a table salt. But yeah, that is not because I got it wet or anything. It's literally that consistency all the time. It kind of like clumps together. So that's why a lot of times people like the grinders, or like when it's a little bit finer, like the shakers with the Celtic sea salt. But I just think it's cool just to see the real texture of what it looks like after it's been kind of mined safely. Yeah.
Yeah, I know it has a gray hue to the color. So what mineral is that?
Yeah, so the gray hue, oh man, that's a good question. I want to say that it's not a mineral, if I remember right. It's like the actual like coloration from the way that it evaporates from the Celtic Sea. But again, we'll have to double check their website, because I know they talk about that too. So I'll have to post it, or I can always let everyone know in like a follow-up video. But that's a really good question. Yeah. Because I know it's kind of a strange color. Any other questions today? We're feeling good? Everyone going to go out and buy their good quality salt? Thanks, Facebook.